On November 17th, 1941, Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin and two of his Red Army comrades crawled towards a German-held foxhole outside of what was then known as Leningrad. It was bitterly cold, and the ground crunched under the weight of their bodies. Suddenly, a German soldier jumped out of the foxhole, pulled the pin on a grenade, threw it at the Russians, and disappeared. Shrapnel ripped through Vladimir's legs and killed his two comrades. He would have died as well had not a former neighbor found him by chance and carried him over his shoulder to a field hospital. Doctors were able to save his legs, but he would be in pain for the rest of his life. His personality was said to have turned taciturn, severe, unloving, and paranoid. Vladimir's wife, Maria, was also severely injured in the siege of Leningrad. Their son, Victor, died of diphtheria during this time, joining their firstborn, Albert, who died in infancy before the start of the war. After 872 days and a bitter cost of over 1.5 million lives lost, the Red Army took back the city of Leningrad. Vladimir and Maria survived, and despite the toll that the war excised on them and their city, the victory in Leningrad and the march of the Soviet army into the heart of Germany, broadcast with chest-thumping patriotism on state media, became part of the Putin's family story, told and retold to their third-born son, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Born in 1952, the younger Vladimir was a slight boy with a mean streak who was often bullied by those bigger and stronger than him. This changed with his training in Sambo, a form of martial arts developed by the Red Army, but after losing their first two sons, his parents' paranoia for Vladimir's safety led him to have a sheltered and secretive upbringing. In university, Vladimir's personality characteristics put him on the radar of the powerful security and intelligence agency, the KGB. The admissions process included interviewing the elder Vladimir, who was recorded saying to a KGB agent, "Our two sons died. Vladimir is everything for us. Now we live only his life." Abram has done everything God has asked him to do. When the Lord told him, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you," at 75 years old, Abram packed up everything and left. After a time of wandering, he and his wife Sarai and their household settled in the land of Canaan as instructed. As the years went by, Abram became increasingly worried about his line ending with his death. "You have given me no offspring," he cries out to God. In Canaan, Abram had become very rich in livestock and silver and gold. The ancient world lived by the patriarchal inheritance custom of primogeniture, which saw the continuation of the father's line through the firstborn son. Abram was a product of his time, and he desperately wanted to leave an heir, a bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, to carry on his legacy, achievements, and bloodline. Despite God's promise in Genesis 12 that "I will make of you a great nation," in their advancing age, Abram and Sarai did not have any children, and a slave born in Abram's house was to be his heir, which was seen as an insufficient outcome in his eyes and the eyes of his culture. Abram reached an impasse, terrified that with his death, everything that he had and was would perish. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." Jesus said to them, Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Scholars are split whether this warning of the Pharisees was an authentic intervention because they were sympathetic to Jesus, or whether this was an organized element of Herod's propaganda machine deployed to disrupt Jesus' mission and movement. Whatever the intent, it had no effect. Jesus' face was set on Jerusalem, and nothing was going to alter his march towards the holy city, not even threats of violence and death from Herod. History records King Herod the Great, as he was known, as a paranoid and ruthless madman. He executed one of his wives, 2 of his sons, and numerous detractors. In the Gospels, when Herod heard rumors about the birth of a rival king, he ordered the execution of all male children 2 years old and under in the vicinity of Bethlehem. It is noteworthy, however, that the fox Jesus refers to in our Luke reading is not Herod the Great, but his son, Herod Antipas. This is the younger Herod, who imprisoned Jesus' cousin John the Baptist, and then on a drunken dinner party dare, ordered John's execution and had his head delivered on a silver platter. Herod the Great not only passed down worldly power and wealth to his heir, but also bequeathed his cruelty and his malice. In our United Church of Canada faith statement, a song of faith, it says, "Made in the image of God, we yearn for the fulfillment that is life in God. Yet we choose to turn away from God. We surrender ourselves to sin, a disposition revealed in selfishness, cowardice, or apathy. Becoming bound and complacent in a web of false desires and wrong choices, we bring harm to ourselves and others. Sin is not only personal, but accumulates to become habitual and systemic forms of injustice, violence, and hatred." Sin accumulates. It accumulates and is perpetuated in human systems like families, like empires, like corporations, like churches. Sin separates us from our humanity and obfuscates our identity as children of God in the image of God. Sin is the shrapnel in our flesh that fuels fear and paranoia and pushes us to crave the immortalization of our own power and reputation, regardless of the consequences to others, the earth, or even our own soul. Sin is amnesia to who we are, whose we are, and to what we are called, which is the fulfillment that is life in God. Sin accumulates. It is passed on and passed down. Sin accumulates to become habitual forms of injustice, violence, and hatred. Oh, how I have desired to gather you together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you were not willing. The Angus Reid Institute published a report a few days ago entitled "COVID at 2 Years." Vast majorities say that the pandemic has pulled Canadians apart, brought out the worst in people. The findings of the study are stark. 82% of respondents believe that the pandemic has pulled people apart as opposed to bringing them together. About the same number, 79%, say this period has brought out the worst, not the best in people. Nearly 2/3, 61%, say Canadians' level of compassion to one another has weakened. Researchers note that while Canadians had an absolute sense of common purpose and mission at the outset of the pandemic, as the months ground on and it got harder and more personal sacrifices were required, there has been a stark breakdown in social cohesion. We have become more divided, cynical, jaded, insular, prone to anger, violence, and even hatred. The implications play out on our screens in our politics, in our streets, and even on the walls of our church. All the while, our young people watch and emulate what they see and hear and feel from the so-called grown-ups in their lives. Sin accumulates. Sin accumulates and grinds on like the march of soldiers on frozen earth. Oh, how I have desired to gather you together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you were not willing. On his Lenten pilgrimage in the wilderness, Jesus discerned that no matter the obstacles thrown up by the forces and temptations of evil, his mission would be to bring good news to the poor, the weary, the lonely, and the left behind, so that all may have dignity in the fulfillment that is life in God. He would declare God's intentions for a great rebalancing, where the unfair and unjust consolidation of wealth and influence in the hands of a few powerful men would be broken. Jesus knew that his mission would take him to the holy city of Jerusalem, the city that killed the prophets and was the epicenter of imperial power in the region. Friedrich Nietzsche's words come to mind. Those who have a why can bear almost any how. Despite the warnings, Jesus' face is set. He will not turn back, even though he knows it will be a one-way journey. Jesus' language to the Pharisees is intentional here. The mother hen will stand between her disobedient chicks and the fox. She will save them because she loves them. Arms outstretched, Jesus will stand before the forces of sin and evil and death and break their power through his sacrificial love. His face is set. His mission is clear. He will not turn back. In the book of Genesis, we see that God does not leave Abram in his despair. We see that God is a covenant keeper. Abram is told to look to the heavens and to count the stars. God counsels him to look beyond himself and his self-interest and even his survival to see the deeper realities of life. He is star stuff. His origins are beyond his imagination, and long after he is gone, God's world will continue. Yes, children will be born that will give birth to nations, but first recognize the wonder of God's good creation within which his children will be born. God is a covenant keeper. God does not abandon us to our despair. As Christians, we affirm that God's covenant is made known to us in the person of Jesus, who is the Christ, the union of flesh and spirit, dust of the earth and the spinner of stars, time-bound and timeless, the great cosmic figure with sand between his toes, the one who has traveled our past and prepares our future, the one who calls us into a mission of compassion and self-giving so that our souls and creation itself may be healed, the one who loves us, the one who stands arms outstretched to sin and evil and death and says, "No, not my children." In the 5th century, a Christian missionary in Ireland, who we now know as St. Patrick, wrote this prayer in a time of particular hardship in his life. Christ as a light, illumine and guide me. Christ as a shield, overshadow me. Christ under me, Christ over me. Christ beside me, on my left and my right. This day be within and without me, lowly and meek, yet all-powerful. Be in the heart of each to whom I speak, in the mouth of each who speaks unto me. This day be within and without me, lowly and meek, yet all-powerful. Christ as a light, Christ as a shield, Christ beside me on my left and my right. In these days of war and division, God does not abandon us to our despair. Christ stands before you. He waits in all the dark rooms you pretend are locked, in all the battlefields you just can't leave behind. He waits there with arms outstretched. Christ stands before you, ready to take the pain of the world into his own flesh. Offer him your pain. Offer him your anger. Offer him all that separates you from the love of God, of self, of neighbor. Offer him your anxiety for the present and your fear for the future. Offer him all you are ashamed of, all you wish to forget, all you resent about yourself, all the hurt you feel, all the hurt you've caused. Offer him the shrapnel lodged deep in your flesh. Offer him your pain. Do this for yourself. Do this for your family and your communities. Do this for the young people around you who will watch and see you learning to walk with grace in the minefields of these days. Christ stands before you, arms outstretched, ready to welcome you back to yourself and the wonder of God's good creation in which you were born, a deeply beloved child. Amen.